Hi, my name's Jake. This is Canadian Cutting Edge, and I'm talking to Canadians today about how to avoid getting your knives confiscated by CBSA when you're buying foreign knives. One of the things I can't do is answer those emails and those Facebook posts of, Jake, CBSA took one of my knives. What can I do? Please help. I'd really like to help. I'd really like to give you more information, and that's why I'm making this video. I can't simply spend a lot of time writing out answers for you, individualized support. I'd really like to. Honestly, I really would like to be able to, but I simply don't have the time. My fight with my chronic pain and, between my pain and the meds and what they do to me, it's taking everything I can to make these videos. I know I make them look like I'm not, challenged in any way. That's the benefit of editing. But that is a huge challenge to me, just to make the videos and to get those up. I don't have the mental energy, to be able to do a lot of support if CBSA takes one of your knives. So I really like chatting with you guys and stuff, but that question I simply don't want to answer, 5 times a week from 5 different guys, 12 different guys in that month, because it doesn't happen very often to you, because if you're buying 5-6 times a year of a foreign knife, chances are very low that this is going to happen at all. And if it does happen, it'll happen once. So watch this video, learn from the advice that I'm going to give to you. First, why buy foreign anyways? Why not just buy my knives from some Canadian vendors? Well, that's a really good thought, and I would prefer to do that myself. There's one big hindrance to that possibility. Well, there's actually 2. First, cost. Canadian vendors simply charge way too much for the same knife that I can get elsewhere. For example, Amazon.ca, Amazon.com, it's usually close to half as much to buy the exact same knife at Amazon.com as it is to buy it from Amazon.ca. Of course, there'd be the added expense of shipping it into Canada. But there's a problem there as well. Most vendors at Amazon.com will not ship knives to Canada. There's the odd exception, but usually that doesn't happen. So then I'm left with buying my knives from some other vendors. The biggest reason why? Cost. It's a whole lot cheaper most of the time to buy knives from some other country other than Canada and have them shipped in. Especially if you're a channel like mine, where I do a lot of Ganzo knives, I do a lot of Chinese-made knives, other knives that are made elsewhere, different vendors. It's just often so much less expensive to buy foreign. The cost is such a wide difference between how much it costs to buy them in Canada and how much it costs to buy them foreign that it's worth the risk of having some of my knives confiscated by the Canadian Border Services Agency, CBSA. I'll tell you what, in my history, let's just take the last year, 2016, I had roughly 6% of my foreign purchased knives confiscated by CBSA. That number actually might be a little bit high, but I wanted to make sure I gave you the biggest number I possibly could so I don't lead anybody astray. So I did the math. When you factor all of the expenses and the conversion rates of dollars and everything, you do all that math, or I did all that math, I still saved between 35 and 40% by buying foreign, even though some of them got confiscated. I find a lot of people who are watching my videos from Canada, they are so scared of getting a knife confiscated by CBSA that you're buying from other people who've purchased knives, and you're buying from Canada, and you're buying from another person who's got a knife into Canada, and you're spending so much more money just to avoid the psychological pain of having a knife confiscated. And yeah, it sucks to have a knife confiscated. But when you do the math and you think logically through it, it's worth the risk. So they take a knife, they take 2 knives, they take 3 knives. They've taken 12 of my knives last year. That's an average of 1 a month. April was terrible. I had 6 knives taken in April alone. At the end of April, I could have just said, screw it. This does not make any sense. I'm not doing it anymore. But I persevered. And there are ways to avoid getting your knives inspected and confiscated by CBSA. That's my next major point. How? How can I stop CBSA from taking my knives? Well, the first thing that you need to do is what I learned in April. Only buy 1 or a maximum of 2 knives per purchase. No matter where you're buying them from, don't make a big order. You might be tempted to make a big order, in the hopes that it gets through, you're going to save shipping money. Well, a lot of these vendors, foreign vendors, give you free shipping anyways, especially if they're from China. But even if you're buying from the US or from some other place, the temptation is there to get the product at, to save your shipping money by spreading it between 5 knives instead of 2, so that it's less dollars per knife that you're spending on shipping. Don't give in to that temptation. It's not worth the increased risk. The thing is, the larger the physical size of the package, the greater your odds are that it's going to get stopped and inspected by a CBSA agent. I don't have any evidence for that. It's just anecdotal. In my experience, the bigger packages are the ones that get stopped and they get inspected. There's a truth that needs to be addressed. CBSA is not consistent with which knives they're going to confiscate from you. First off, their interpretation of the knife laws in Canada, I think, are twisted. They're not following what the law actually says. I go to my local RCMP office and I ask them about knives and they said, no, I'd never stop a guy with a knife like that. That's not illegal. That's not a problem knife. You're free to have that. But when it comes through CBSA and they inspect it, they interpret the law in a different way and they say, we're taking that knife away from you. You're not allowed to have it. It's amazing how they allow vendors to get a whole bunch of knives, but individuals can't get the identical knife. I have had some knives that were at an inspection deemed inadmissible into Canada, and yet I ordered the exact same knife at a different time, and it gets inspected. You get the tape on it, the yellow tape, when it arrives, and I have the exact same knife, just in a different color, and it's allowed in. Who knows? They are not consistent. You can't avoid it. Another thing that you can do to help mitigate the risk, this time I'm going to talk about GearBest. When I buy from them, I make sure that I choose, at least presently it's called CA registered at checkout for being the shipper. The shipper CA registered, because it seems to me that when you do that, it gets routed through Britain and shipped to Canada. The country of origin, or the last country of origin before it gets into Canada, makes a big difference on how CBSA agents will deal with the package. I know, it's not fair. It's just the way it is. I'm assuming they think if a knife comes from Britain that it's applicable to British laws, and therefore, since their laws are much more strict than ours, the knife is probably allowable. I don't know if that's what the agents are thinking or not. Who knows? But if my knife comes through the Netherlands, which is the predominant way that knives come through GearBest, if you choose the very cheapest shipping through GearBest, chances are very high it'll come through the Netherlands. And I think CBSA agents have already learned that GearBest ships through the Netherlands. And so it's more likely that they will get detained if they come through the Netherlands. So I choose CA registered, tends to come through Britain. It's not guaranteed. And GearBest changes their shipping so often. Every 6 months or so, they change how their shipping works. So unfortunately, you can't always do it, but try to get it shipped through Britain if you can, or some other Commonwealth country, if that choice is there. So what do you do if they do take a knife away? That's the third major question. I've had a package confiscated by CBSA. Jake, what do I do? 1, do not appeal. I know you're going to be tempted to appeal because you're going to have all kinds of logical arguments in your mind why you should win that appeal. And although your arguments might be logically correct, they will not be valid to the eyes of the appeal. The reason being, who sees your appeal? It doesn't go to our judicial system. It goes to another government office, the Trade Department. I forget the exact title. And they have a history of always taking the side of CBSA and denying that knife of being entered into Canada. Appeal won't work. They even give you a piece of paper and they'll tell you, here's a list of arguments that are not valid. And one of them is, this exact same knife is sold at other vendors in Canada. You'd think that's logical, but they say, no, you can't use that argument. CBSA is the department that's in charge of allowing those knives in, not only to individuals, but to businesses as well. And so they let businesses have them and sell them, but they don't let individuals have them. If you lose the appeal, you also lose the right to have that knife shipped out of Canada. So the second option you're given is you're allowed to have that knife shipped out of Canada, back to the vendor. You can have it shipped to anybody, anywhere else, to anybody in the whole world at your expense. And you have to find a carrier who's willing to take that knife. The thing is, they're going to label it dangerous goods. And so some carriers may or may not take on that job. I'm not going to assist you in finding a carrier. I simply don't have the time to do that for you. Different carriers at different times will take a package and the next time they won't. And it's just something you have to work through on your own. So you contact FedEx and UPS and, Purolator and DHL, and you just go through the whole list until you find somebody, one company who's willing to pick up the package from CBSA and ship it somewhere else in the world. Ship it back to the vendor, try to get your money back, get approval from the vendor first, or ship it to somebody else. I've never actually done this, but if I would do it, I'd get it shipped to my friend in the US. From there, I can either have him hold it while I remotely sell it to somebody else, whatever. There's other places I can send the knife. So your choice is try to appeal. You will lose. You won't have access to the knife anymore to get it shipped somewhere else. I say don't appeal. I say either have the knife shipped out to somebody else in some other place or simply accept the loss. If you're a person like me and you're buying like a Ganzo knife, a knife that costs $16 US, so it costs $21 Canadian, it's not going to be worth me to pay $35 to a shipper to have it shipped to the US. It's just not going to be worth it. And since I've already limited myself to one or two knives, chances are very high, and in reality, in my experience, it's never been worth it for me to ship a knife out to some other person. But you might be collecting knives that are worth $100, $200, $150. And in a case like that, it's worth it to spend $30, $40, $50 on UPS, DHL, Purolator, whatever, to get your knife shipped somewhere else, if you've got a plan for what you're going to do with it at that point. And my biggest plan is make friends with people in the US and make such good friends with them that they're willing to accept a knife from you, and they'll are willing to do the work of shipping it on to somewhere else or whatever. I've got a sister in Nebraska, so she's willing to do some of that work for me. And I've got a friend in one of the states who's willing to help me with that. So use the comment section below to try to find yourself a friend, an American friend who's willing to help you out this way. That's what I suggest. Once you have that friend or a family member that lives in the US, here's another thing that you can try to increase your odds of getting your knife into Canada. For example, let's say you're getting a Ganzo knife like I was talking about, and some of them, you do that, and the knife opens up and it locks open. CBSA agents are calling that a centrifugal knife. It's not using centrifugal force, though. We know that it's using inertia, but that argument won't fly, so don't try to use that on an appeal. But they'll keep this knife if it comes to them in this kind of condition. So what I do is, with a lot of my Ganzo knives and other knives, if I want to lower the risk, I send my knife from the vendor straight to my friend in the US, and he either tightens up my pivot and ships it up to me in Canada. Yes, I incur a little bit more cost in shipping this way. It was virtually free, or just a couple bucks from GearBest, and then I pay, $15 for 3 or 4 knives to come from the US. That's the only time I make that exception in how many knives I take, by the way. So I either get him to tighten up the pivot and send it up to me, or I take the risk of having him send up a package straight from a person, an individual, not a business, to another individual, because the odds are very low that CBSA is going to open up the package and inspect it. It can still happen. I can still lose a knife that way. I've not lost a knife that way yet, but it could happen. And so I take knives that can open like this from the store, if they're that way from the factory, which a lot of Ganzos with the access lock, they call it a G-lock, but with that lock are, send it to a guy in the US and have him send it on to me, either tightened by the pivot a little bit or not. And if you tighten the pivot gently and carefully, you can do it without marring the screws and make it so that it's just harder for the knife to be deployed. You can't get it deployed that way. If you tighten it up so much that the knife cannot come out at all, CBSA agent's gonna figure it out and keep it. So you have to make sure that you can still deploy the knife. And there you go. Another way to lower your risks. Another one of the things that you can do to minimize the risk of having your knife confiscated is make sure your vendor is honest on the custom forms. This is a really big deal. This is the reason why I do not deal with Fast Tech anymore, because they will always put something else on the customs form than what it really is. If you buy a knife, they're going to say it's electronics, or they're going to say it's something else. And that's simply because there's been some short-sighted Canadians in the past that have asked them to put something other than knife on the customs forms. You might be tempted that that's a good idea. Hey, if it says electronics on there, they're not going to take a look at it, and it'll pass through customs, and I'll get my knife, and everything's wonderful. Short-sighted and not good thinking. If you are dishonest, I've had knives confiscated, knives that are perfectly legal in Canada, but they found a reason to confiscate them because I lied on the custom forms. They blame the receiver for what it says on the custom forms. CBSA makes it your responsibility to have the seller be honest on the customs form. So have them put on their cutlery or hand tool if you don't want them to say knife. But make sure that it's something that actually is another word for a knife. Otherwise, you're taking a risk with that entire package of it being confiscated by CBSA. So there you go. That's how to deal with CBSA. I'm a guy living on disability pension. I know my funds are very limited. I know your funds are probably limited as well. If you're watching this, you're concerned about this. But even from a very limited income like I have, you can still save money by buying foreign. It's worth the risk if you mitigate the risks as much as you possibly can. So I know that this video has a whole bunch of different ideas, and it might seem that they're sort of in a bit of a random order. I apologize for that. It was kind of difficult to get it all straight. But it has all the ideas in there. So if you're a Canadian, you know another knife guy that buys knives, let them know about this video so they can be informed as well and be prepared and sort of prevent, or at least lower the odds that they are going to have knives taken away by CBSA. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for being a friend of this channel and putting in some comments on the videos. I really appreciate that. Thank you for clicking like. And remember, always cut towards your chum, maybe a CBSA agent, and not your thumb.